Hi there, everyone. Coming up on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, Kevin Gordon and Jack O'Connell are here to talk about the budget, about COVID-19 policies and procedures, and the upcoming legislative session.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And on a Wednesday, we welcome you to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, with Edgar Zuss, what's ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj Al-Khan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome back. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. So happy to have you back with us today. Go ahead and jump onto the chat. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from today, and let us know how the distribution of COVID-19 tests are happening in your district. We certainly want to learn about that. Edgar, how are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Naj. Excited to be back here. You know, crazy times has become the norm here. But I'm excited, and I'm excited to see so many of our folks jumping on as well. No easy time. I know a lot of our administrators are doing double, triple duty here now, you know, filling in classrooms. So just appreciate everybody making the time and joining us here in the new year.
Yeah, we've got a big show. Want to say hello to Morgan Nugent. Vicky Zanz is there, Ellen Wheeler, Sunny Dawn, Grant Bennett, Angela Shull, Maria and Gail. So good to have you guys here on the very first show of 2022. I want to make sure that everybody knows we do have a little breaking news that we're going to give to you in just a moment. And then Kevin and Jack from Capitol Advisors are going to be here a little bit later on in the show to talk about what's going to happen at the Capitol this week and what's happening throughout the state. Edgar, I just want to go over a little bit of data because, you know, there's so much going on right now. Want to make sure that we talk just about the statistics right now, because we've got a positivity rate that was hovering around 5% for COVID-19 in our K-12 schools before the holidays. But according to the Sacramento Bee, on this side of the holidays, the positivity rate jumping to 20.4%, nearly quadruple the rate it was prior to Christmas break. The Bee calling it a worse surge than that caused by the Delta variant over the summer and the surge in March 2020. That caused many schools to send their students home. This leads, Edgar, to our breaking news that's just coming out of the state capitol. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so one of the things that, people have been somewhat bracing themselves because I think they see some of the headlines around the state, around the country, in terms of other schools or other states, pushing back start dates after the Christmas break, or districts, or in some cases, some states moving to virtual learning. I'll start by saying the breaking news has nothing to do with that. I mean, I think it's still very much status quo right now in terms of the state's commitment to really keep kids in-person instruction. So nothing along those lines. We'll get into some of these issues with our guest about what may happen in the weeks to come. A little bit of a breaking news, which is not just, things that we knew were coming down the pipeline. They are now making some changes to the guidance, to the CDPH guidance, which has kind of been the guidepost for a lot of our counties and schools on how you deal with the quarantines, with the isolation period. So basically what the CDPH and the governor's office just put out a few minutes ago is some of those formal modifications of, all these headlines that we've been hearing, and some controversy from CDC and from the Biden administration about what do you do? When can anybody, frankly, not just students, when can anybody exit this isolation period if you've tested positive? The state is now saying that these rules will also apply to schools. So in other words, if a student tests positive, staff, there's some rules around Cal OSHA, but if a student tests positive, they can exit isolation after the 5 days with the test. That I know there was some back and forth in terms of CDC, whether a test would be required. The state is going ahead and putting that forward for schools, just like they did for the general recommendation that on day 5, you get a test. If your symptoms are getting better and you take a test, they do actually prefer an antigen test, and there's a reason for that. The PCR test can be very sensitive. You could be on day 5 and you have no more symptoms. You could still be having COVID in your body, and they don't necessarily want that to be the case, because in some cases you could be testing positive on a real sensitive test for weeks. So on day 5 or later that you have a test, if you don't have access to a test, they are recommending that you wait till day 10 to exit isolation. On the flip side, there was another, not a change to the guidance, but this is something that folks have been asking about. The CDC guidance and the state guidance had been talking about for exposure. So not if you're tested positive, but if you're closer than 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, what do you do? Who has to quarantine there? They did change the rules for the general public, saying that now if you're fully vaccinated and boosted, which was new, and boosted, you didn't have to quarantine. What's significant here is the state saying those rules aren't going to apply to schools just yet. They're looking at the new guidance. They're saying the old rules in terms of exposure that we had, the modified quarantine, all that fun stuff, that's still going to be in place for the time being. So they're taking some of the guidance from CDC, not all of it. I know this is just going to lead to a lot more confusion. We'll be here to try to clarify this in the days and weeks to come. So I think the headline there is isolation 5 days with a test. If you test positive, no changes to the rules for exposure for the time being, but that they are expecting to change those rules in the coming days. I know I threw it a lot out there. Well, we have all year to explain it here.
It may take all year for us to explain all of that. I saw Michelle Eklund, who's the great communicator over at Placer County Office of Education. Michelle, we will put the link for that document in the chat, so all of you have the opportunity to see that. And
let me give a big caveat here, because I know I've seen some question, when is this effective, when this is going case? Anything the state puts out is really, and this has been an evolution. We didn't always talk about it this way. These are recommendations from the state. In most cases, the county health office will just take the recommendation and put it in place. But that's the one big caveat that, folks, I would refer to what your local county office is doing, your public health office. In some cases, they've already gone ahead of the state and already put in their own rules. So while these are recommendations from the state, and this is effective now, as soon as they publish them, that is the recommendation. They treat that as such, but it's always important to keep in touch with your local county health office.
Let me, pardon me. I had mentioned this right off the top, Edgar, and we'll get to some of the feedback that's come in on our comment section, because something that we heard overall during the holidays was the distribution of the COVID-19 tests to the school districts, so that there could be some wide, pardon me, wide distribution of these tests to students. We've gotten some feedback. I just want to bring a couple of districts, just highlight them. Specifically first here in Sacramento County, the expectation, Edgar, was that we were supposed to get these tests before the new year. Sacramento County Office of Education reporting yesterday from KCRA, they received their testing kits on Monday. I spoke with the comms team over at Stockton Unified. They received theirs earlier today, and now they're working on the distribution plan. We're hearing reflections from so many places statewide. I want to bring in a couple of these comments that I'm seeing here. Angela Schell said COVID test distribution went smoothly on Monday. First day back, this resulted in lots of positive notifications on Tuesday morning. Let me see. Michelle Murphy, tests have not arrived. Michelle had in here, Michelle Eklund says more than 73,000 tests were received and going out this week in Placer County. John Bohannon says tests have not arrived in Butte County. Edgar, what are you hearing? Because it seems like the tests are coming to some, whether it was before the holidays or after, and some are not even receiving the tests yet. What are you hearing from our educators statewide?
As I'm sure a lot of folks experience over the break, and it still seems to be the case, finding a COVID test seemed like striking gold, over the last number of weeks. And while the state had a good intent here, made this announcement, the governor made an announcement on the first days of the holiday break, on the heels of what the Biden administration was putting out, that they were going to send tests to the field across the state, and with the intent of sending those home to families. As we've seen, it happened in a very interesting time. I think there was a myriad of issues. One, it was the timing of it. Some schools were already off, right? So even getting those tests to county offices having them get them to districts. In any case, that audit didn't happen in every instance just because of the timing. And I know the state pointed to that there were some delays on them getting some of the tests that they purchased because of weather, because of just delays that were happening during the holiday season. So the intent of trying to get these tests to families before they came back to school didn't always work. In some cases, schools are getting the tests with really the intent is, okay, we have now more rapid tests at our disposal, send them home. But as you mentioned, and I think what we're seeing in the chat is reflective of some of the statistics. I think as of yesterday, there were some reports that 20 counties still hadn't received the test. So the supply is supposed to increase. That's what the state officials keep telling us, that there will be more on the way. So hopefully that this will improve.
And I do want to ask one more thing, because we know that the governor has been committed to keeping schools open here in the state of California amongst this pandemic. But I do want to draw attention. While the state has avoided any widespread closures, districts around the country in places like Atlanta, Cleveland, parts of New Jersey, I understand in Chicago, there has been a move back to remote instruction. When you see other places moving back to remote instruction and seeing California have that commitment to the in-person instruction, what is your view on it? How are you seeing the comparison one area to the next?
Yeah, I won't steal all of our guest thunder, but I will say this is really a result of, the surge is coming and we're seeing it in California, but really the rules that were set up here in our state, I think, differ than some of the flexibility that you're seeing in Philadelphia and other districts where they're now closing. Fact of the matter is, the state didn't write the statute in a way where districts can just choose to say, hey, we're going to go virtual for 2 weeks, right? And I think this is something we'll get into with our guest in terms of, will there need to be any pivoting, especially if the cases get a lot worse here in the next couple of weeks?
Well, there you go. We're going to bring in our guest right now, as long as I can hit the button correctly. Kevin Gordon is the president and partner over at Capital Advisors. Jack O'Connell, partner at Capital Advisors, and also the two-term state superintendent of public instruction in California, Kevin and Jack. So honored to have you guys on the show, and they have completely planned folks to be in this one office with the both of them. So we will be interested to see them fight over this microphone for the next or so. Edgar, you and I are going to be keeping score on this.
The microphone has a mask on it.
Oh, there you go. The microphone has a mask. See, these guys are prepared. With that's what we like. Let me ask both of you, and Kevin, we'll start with you. There's a lot going on right now in terms of schools and activity, obviously with COVID cases, staff shortages, delayed testing kits, the whole thing. As we move through the first week of this year, what do you see are the biggest issues right now on the forefront?
Yeah, so obviously the most immediate thing is exactly what you guys are talking about. And that is that how do we keep school open with all of these different characteristics that did not exist at any other time during the pandemic? So we've got these chronic staff shortages of people. We did not have that problem last time around. We've got obviously a great deal more vulnerability now than we ever had under the what we sort of call the alpha virus or delta with regard to young children. We have that now. So there are really big different characteristics. And so what we look for is the announcements that the state made today, very, superficial announcements, but changes in guidance. We look to what the governor may do, probably coupled with his budget announcement. I think he's going to take what was one-time money aimed at doing things to grapple with the pandemic. They thought it was one-time investment they needed to do and get past it. but now obviously we're still living with it. So you'll probably see some additional one-time augmentations for any PPP or testing or any of those kinds of things in that budget, but also probably more significant guidance right away as the budget drops either on Friday or Monday for some guidance. So that's what we look at first. Clearly, there's a lot of big headlines we're looking for on bigger issues, but the most urgent thing right now is how do we grapple with the challenges of staying open? And that's the dominant issue that's both local for you guys in school districts, as well as those of us up here working on your behalf.
And I might just add that, isn't it interesting here? This is really the week of the budget. I mean, everybody, great anticipation, money flowing in. The most recent projection, $31 billion above projections when the budget took effect, 6 months ago. And here we are, hardly mentioned the budget at all. This isn't an issue where we're talking about money or resources. Federal government has stepped up to the plate. Last tally I saw, Kevin, was around $15 billion coming more just to California. Keep in mind that's one time. But here we are talking about not the budget, the week that the budget's going to be coming out. So that just tells you the change in focus. And our folks out here, we're going to have to be nimble. It's the changing landscape, beneath us. And despite great efforts, and what's different today than a year ago is the number of our folks who are vaccinated, number of our administrators, teachers, the classified personnel. Impressive numbers that I've seen, and now students are working on that. The students being boosted if you're in high school, is the age. So that's changed clearly. And yet that said, we've heard from some school districts 30% of the faculty calling in sick. And so that might be what changes a pivot here down the road, again, depending on these changing dynamics, changing characteristics.
Hey, Kevin, Jack, first of all, thank you for joining. And I appreciate the Capitol Advisors uniform that you guys are wearing and the matching ties. I hope Yvonne got one when he went over there. So I'll be looking out for the same uniform there from him. In all seriousness, Jack, I'm going to ask you this question. We're obviously our conversation dominated by COVID, and we'll get back to some of the COVID related issues, obviously dominating our chat. Let me ask you a political question, which is, which we're seeing here this week. By the moment, by the day, it seems like countless legislators are announcing they're not running again. They're not coming back. Significantly, we have some of the key legislators who oversee education here in California. Both chairs of our respective education committees in the last 2 days have said they're not running again. Maybe give us some political context on what's happening right now, and what may this mean for all of our efforts on our advocacy moving forward.
Good question, Edgar, and a couple of points. Every decade, every 10 years, when I was in the legislature, and I was there 20 years, we said every 10 years, the voters don't select us, we select the voters, and that's called reapportionment. And so every state in the country, every 10 years to reflect the census, changing population, because you try to have these districts, both in the state assembly, state senate, and congressional, have roughly the same number of folks in your state. It's almost 500,000 people in the assembly district, almost 1 million in the Senate district. And so the changing lines have contributed a great deal since they became public here about 10 days ago towards people realizing they're going to wake up and not live in the district that they've represented or that they wish to represent. Or the lines have changed where you have two people living in the same district. And so, it's friends against friends, and it's new territory. And then you also have factored into that term limits continuing to take people out, which we didn't deal with, 20, 30 years ago as well. So I think that the pressures of the job, certainly the potential to make more money, on the outside, you're seeing that a lot in Congress. I think in Congress, you're seeing a large number of Democrats who have announced they're not going to seek re-election. People that I served with, Lucille Robow-Allard, Jackie Spear. I mean, my goodness, they've been in there between the two of them, 50 years, I'm sure, combined. And they both announced that they're going to retire. And I think part of that is the projections, again, in terms of the reapportionment and the impact that's going to have on the Democratic, very thin majorities that they have in the House right now. And that's going to even impact the next presidential election and beyond, when you do this reapportionment, California, for the first time ever, lost a congressional seat. We're going from 53 to 52. And that means we're going to have one less electoral college vote. Oregon tells a similar story. And so some of the blue states are actually losing. And some of the red states, the Texas and Florida, that have gone Republicans voting for president, they're going to be increasing their electoral college majority. So that's going to, I think, be more of a challenge at the national level as well, both in Congress today and the electoral college when they get ready to meet again in 2024.
Right. And then the one thing I would add, just in terms of political dimensions, of the loss at the end of this year, when they do elect replacements for these two members, Connie Leyva, the chair of Senate Ed, as well as Patrick O'Donnell, the chair of Assembly Ed, as you noted, Edgar. We're going to have, new legislators that we got to get up to speed on policy issues. There's 120 legislators, but there's probably less than maybe a dozen that really know education policy well. And to lose the chairs is a big deal. What that actually accrues a political benefit to, ironically, is the governor, is that it just puts more sort of that institutional memory, power, the political balance with the governor that does with the legislature when you have sort of less of that experienced legislating happening with these two legislators that we've really gotten to a place that you see them when they make a speech in front of school folks. Those two members, more than many, really get it with regard to education policy, and to lose them is really unfortunate. But, it is something that eventually was going to happen with term limits anyhow. So there'll be that turnover. And one of the things that's going to be very important is for ACSA, which you guys always are, to be engaged with the legislative leadership in both houses to help shape who those successors might be. And so that's going to be very, very important.
And Edgar, further to your point, is a lot of staff changes as well. And to the benefit of ACSA, you've been able to attract some of the folks over there, and the California Department of Education, over which I headed several years ago. A lot of changes there as well in terms of personnel.
I want to remind you that if you have a question for Kevin and Jack, go ahead and jump into our chat, into our comment section, put them in there, and we'll make sure we can squeeze those in before the end of our broadcast today. Kevin, I want to read a quote here that you made from the Sacramento Bee saying, quote, "This was not the situation California lawmakers envisioned when they outlined protocols for a return to in-person instruction last year. The state may need to adjust its thinking if the Omicron surge poses a serious threat to schools." How do you believe the state may need to pivot over these next few weeks?
Right. Well, I've been hearing, as you guys have, from superintendents all over the state, talking about, we got to just make a decision that's right for kids. And if we think we need to toggle over to a virtual kind of setup, we're going to do it. And they asked me, what did I think the percentage chance was that the legislature and the governor would both act in a way that made sure that they got their funding, as opposed to, an overemphasis on, did you follow all the rules relative to independent study and check all those boxes? And I said, honestly, they're dead serious about wanting to really tamp down on anything but in-person instruction. And the only thing that's going to change it, I was not willing to give a percentage, because I said the only thing that's really going to change this is the degree to which this really implodes as a crisis from a staffing standpoint and a transmission standpoint. You get these numbers, and we're getting there. We get these really, really big numbers in different school districts across the state, combined with a lack of staff. You just don't have a choice. And the legislature is going to need to respond to that, depending on how pervasive this problem is. If, in fact, it's something that becomes under control rather rapidly, and the governor really stands by his word, which is to get those tests deployed, and that it ends up being an effective strategy, combined with what will be the idea of having kids quarantine for a shorter period of time, so we're not missing as much school, and it all has symmetry. Great. I'm just not sure it all works out so nice and neat. We know that lack of ability to get test kits out is directly linked to now that shorter quarantine period even working. If we don't have all of those pieces working together, it's going to actually not work out so well. So that's what's going to determine whether or not I think the legislature steps in, or the governor says we need an executive order to create yet another avenue for distance learning for a short period of time in order to get through this. You might remember that when the legislature adopted a budget that used independent study as the exclusive means for distance learning, that as we got into the beginning of the year, we had all kinds of implementation issues. And they actually wrote into that the ability to give us some grace at the beginning to get it implemented. We probably should have had that for the opening of the second semester too. And we don't have that luxury now. So it's posed really big stress points on public schools. That would be an area that I would suspect that the governor should look at for a little bit of relief here, at least in the first 30 days of the second semester. We could really use something like that. And there may be other ideas that'll crop up as we start to, experience the different challenges we're having, where we may need leadership out of the governor and the state to do some things a little differently than they anticipated.
Hey, Jack, along those lines, something may have got lost in the shuffle because it happened during the break. I think a day before Christmas, if I'm not mistaken, is the governor solicited basically the support of all the major statewide education groups, ACSA being one of them, with our labor partners and all the management groups. Basically, everybody on the same page saying that, hey, despite Omicron, we're all committed to in-person learning, right? So they were seeking to put everybody on the record that, yes, we have some challenges here, but we're not looking to go back to virtual learning or distance learning. Given what you both have said, why is the narrative so different, than it was a year ago from a political standpoint? But as I saw Mary's comment, I saw some other folks in our chat saying that their staffs are starting to get nervous and starting to question, how's this sustainable? So just analysis on how things are different than they were a year ago, but how things could potentially change here in the coming weeks.
Sure. And I kind of alluded to this a second ago, Edgar. I think the one big difference today than a year ago is the vaccines. And we have come so far, so fast, not fast enough, and we haven't come all the way. The boosters. But the big difference is that we have, clear majority of our administrators, teachers, classified personnel, they're better prepared today to handle this pandemic. We know more about that pandemic today than we did a year ago. So I think we're better prepared medically. But that said, when you were looking at the shifting of the ground, we have to be ready and to pivot. And some communities are going to be treated different than others because some communities are going to have more widespread of the virus. And so we need to be, I think, nimble on this. I think this isn't going to be just one statewide order to shut down if we hit a certain threshold, but some communities are better prepared. The testing is another big difference in addition to the vaccines. We didn't have that a year ago. And so that can help us. And so hopefully we're able to keep the students in class. That's the goal. That was the letter that ACSA and the education, the leadership, the community, said that they were supportive of with the governor. We know students learn better. We know that our professional educators want to be in school with their students. We know we're better able to prepare students for success when we have them there in the classroom. But that said, we're going to have to be nimble, be prepared to pivot, and continue to analyze the data and let science really drive our decision making.
Right.
Kevin, let me ask you, because we've got the budget expected to come out either Friday or Monday. And for our viewers, we'll tell you after Kevin and Jack leave us here what we have planned for you coming up on the budget. But what is the word? Any predictions, Kevin, on what we may see? Anything with enrollment-based funding? What are you hearing from the Capitol?
Yeah. So there's been some legislative activity. Of course, the legislature's back. They're dropping legislation in that's separate from the budget. And there is movement relative to this issue of enrollment versus ADA funding, with Senator Anthony Portantino dropping in legislation that would sort of address the issue. It does not actually move from an ADA system to enrollment-based. It actually creates a categorical. It's kind of a very odd or different approach that sort of tries to achieve an enrollment-based approach. We're not so sure how effective it is. It needs some work. His heart's absolutely in the right place. I don't know that we need another categorical program. I do think we need a system that recognizes that when we lose a kid for a day or a week or even a month, It does not save us any money. We set the stage for teaching and learning each year. And when we lose kids for all kinds of reasons, for one reason or another, we would lose a grouping of kids. The hurdles we have to go through to recapture that revenue when it doesn't really mean any savings to the LEA is just silliness. And most of the states don't have that kind of approach, an ADA approach. But we do have to be concerned about truancy and keeping kids with good attendance, right? So it's about writing law that balances all those. I'm not sure the Portantino bill quite gets there. But again, it's going to be subject to debate and amendments and lots of potential changes. The governor could weigh on this. I'm not sure that he will. But as far as our projections for the budget itself, we know from experience with this governor, he likes targeted, earmarked expenditures. It's a definite departure from the times of Jerry Brown, who was local control oriented. One year under Jerry Brown, we got the all-time record of ongoing money. It was, $3 billion that went out to districts, completely no strings attached. And the same year, we got the record number of one-time money, $6 billion, no strings attached, went out on an ADA basis. Those numbers have actually increased under Gavin Newsom, except that a lot of the money is one time, a lot of the money has strings attached and is for specific restricted purposes. Not bad purposes necessarily, but we've got to pay attention to the base. And I think this budget will probably start out not going in that direction. It's going to probably be more a focus on solving specific kinds of problems and have a more categorical nature to it, probably less ongoing funding than one time, when in fact the governor will have the latitude to change that balance. So will the legislature. It's going to be up to us to lobby to get the nuances of this budget in the right place. The overall numbers are going to be great. How we spend the money and what the distribution of the money is going to be where the fights are. And so we're getting ready for that. It's going to be a really interesting announcement. I think a lot of people think we'll be really happy, but we got to look at the detail, because the overall numbers are not going to tell the whole story.
Yeah, I like to say we may not have as many categorical programs, but we certainly have categorical funding.
Yep, great point.
Let me go over to a couple of questions that have come on the chat, and there's a couple of our viewers, Rob and Heather, that have spoken, asked specifically about SB 830, likelihood of it passing. Does it address a 3-year average? I'm going to let either one of you jump in on SB 830.
So one of the things that this is the bill by Senator Portantino that I just referenced. And one of the things that he did raise during the press conference where he released the bill is that he would love to see it have a component that had a 3-year rolling average kind of issue to it. What he's talking about is something that Mike Fine and Capital Advisors and other people have put on the table, which is that we do have an issue with regard to protecting school districts with regard to decline in enrollment. And the notion of, instead of the best of the current year or prior year, a 3-year rolling average or the current year would be a better metric, is something a lot of people are interested in. It would, in a really positive way, solve a lot of the problems and anxieties that school districts have had without doing the kind of overt hold harmless that we had in the last, when we did this a year and a half ago. So that's what a lot of people are asking about. They want to see if there's going to be that, because it's going to mean something significant to their bottom line. I'm very confident that I think the legislature and the governor will be going in a direction like this. We'll see if the governor actually has something like this in his budget. If not, the legislature is definitely interested in it. Even Senator Portantino, in a bill that's not directly related to this, said that he wished in his thinking that he might incorporate that issue into his legislation. And then we know that Assemblymember Al Martucci has dropped legislation in to do this again. That legislation would need a little tweak to it. But the point is they're all going in a direction to try to see this done. Now, we can be working on legislation. It does not mean it's the law. So we got a ways to go before it gets implemented. So I wouldn't advise that school districts just bet on the come and budget as if that's a given. We'll see as we get through this in the budget cycle. By May revision, we'll probably have a lot clearer idea if there is unanimity growing around this in both the legislature as well as the governor's office, and be able to give school districts a sense of where that's going. But I put a pretty high likelihood that we're going to get something like this done by the legislature and the governor this coming year.
And this legislation that Kevin's talked about, Senator Portantino's bill, isn't scheduled to take effect for 2 years?
Yes, in fact,
So
that
a couple
bill,
of years.
yeah, wouldn't be till 22, 23.
Yeah.
And my sense of that is instead of waiting a whole year, we actually need some of these solutions earlier, not later.
Yeah.
And I think he put that in there as a placeholder. I think everything is negotiable, and he's definitely a deal maker. So he's somebody that I think we'll be able to work with on this.
And
issue.
the tenacious author, he's the one that authored the late start bill. And a lot of people said that would never get through. It did.
Right.
We have committed to our viewers that we only bring on guests that matter. Kevin Gordon, Jack O'Connell, both from Capital Advisors. They are primed and ready for budget day here in the state of California. Kevin and Jack, honored to have you here on the show. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.
And Edgar, let me reference just some programming announcements for our viewers, because you also have a piece of news that we want to pass along. But on budget day, and we are hearing it's either going to be Friday or Monday, we will have a special edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break at 1 p.m. on budget day. Edgar and I and his team will be here for a quick analysis. We'll have ACSA's interim executive director, Mark Ecker, with us as well. Again, that will come your way, a special edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, either Friday or Monday at 1 o'clock. And then Edgar and the governmental relations team host a webinar that will also be on budget day, 3:30 in the afternoon, with a full breakdown of the governor's budget proposal. That comes your way, 3:30. We'll send out links for that and links for a special edition of our show coming up on budget day. So programming notes for you. Edgar, as we were going through Jack and Kevin talking, you found something newsworthy that just popped up. What can you tell us?
Yeah, and before I get into that, I see all the questions about vaccines and pension related reforms. I will say that all of this is going to definitely be on the table. So it's going to give us plenty of content to talk about here in the next couple of weeks. So as Jack and Kevin noted, some of this is happening at the moment. Legislature's back introducing bills. So we'll definitely keep everybody abreast of all the constant changes. Yeah, one thing that caught my eye, not related to schools, but I think it's a telltale sign of what's happening here in Sac County, and I'm sure it won't be the only county. They're shutting down restaurants. This just got announced a couple minutes ago that this is, takes us back to the early days of the pandemic in spring of 2020, where restaurants are now going to be closed, only open for takeout. And they're doing this. Yes, there's the safety issue, but I think what's the kind of the parallel to schools, they're doing it because of staffing issues, because a number of restaurants have had to close because they don't have the staffing to just keep up, because so many folks are testing positive for COVID. So I think this is one of the things that we're going to have to worry about. And we see it, for you folks are living it firsthand. We see it in the comments about what's going to happen on the school front, regardless of the state rules, as Jack and Kevin talked about, that yes, we're all committed to in-person learning. At the end of the day, do you have enough people to actually staff classrooms, keep students safe? So that was interesting, just seeing that Sac County has taken this step of, and I haven't read the article since we've been on. I'm not sure for how long, if it's indefinite, but essentially that restaurants are only going to be open for takeout only. That, the fact that they're making the connection on the staffing side is, I think, the parallel there, the connection to our school world.
Yeah, that is certainly a connection to it, because again, we have been seeing a lot in our comment section today about part-time employees and staffing shortages, and we are clearly not out of those woods yet. And then we hear this from Sacramento County. I'm wondering, Edgar, do you think that this is something that we may see other counties experience, is shutdowns of some of the commerce, if you will, because we have these staffing shortages, not just in education, but across so many different businesses?
Yeah, I think just given some of the realities, I mean, the numbers are stark as you open the show with some of the statistics, and when you hear about some of the positivity rates that are at the highest that they've ever been throughout the pandemic, right? Like I remember going back, we joked on the show about how, all the messaging about June 15th or whatever, that was supposed to be our independence of COVID. We're far from that. Where now we're seeing some of the some of the biggest numbers. I do think that we may see other counties follow suit. I see Barbie's comment in the chat, which, you know, caught my eye. Something Kevin talked about is the state going to have to pivot? Because right now they set up the rules, as Kevin talked about, to the only real way you can offer distance learning or virtual learning is through this independent study, which isn't going to make sense if a whole school or district is going to have to close down for a short amount of time or for any amount of time, right? So I think that's something we're going to have to talk to the state officials about. I think we're all going to have to be nimble as things are getting pretty challenging here. I know that's a word we've used a lot in the last 2 years, challenging, and this virus never seems to surprise us as we have another new context for this. So yeah, a lot. I expect that there's going to be a lot of news on a lot of fronts here in the coming days and weeks.
Yeah, being nimble, incredibly important. Kevin wanted me to remind our viewers that they will be having their budget perspective workshops that start the week of January 17th. Capital Advisors will have those budget perspective workshops beginning January 17th.
And I think you could go to their website, I think at Capital Advisors, Google, and then they have a full list. I think they're all virtual this year. So that's another good resource for our members.
And again, want to remind all of you on budget day, it's either going to be Friday or Monday, to the best of our knowledge. Edgar and I will be on live and interactive for you with a special edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, 1 p.m. on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. And then we will have the Governmental Relations Department will have their in-depth webinar that begins at 3:30 on either Friday or Monday or whenever the budget comes out. And we'll send you links out for all of those. Edgar, good seeing you back. Certainly a busy day here in the state, and we're either on Friday or Monday. So get some rest because we got a big budget coming.
We'll see a lot of each other. We'll see a lot of our members, and just we're keeping track of all these questions on all our fronts. If we can help, contact us directly, and we'll try to put you in touch with the right people. I see some specific questions in there, so we'll do our best to help.
Absolutely. Thank you, folks, so much for being with us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We are back with our special edition, live and interactive. And then, of course, we are back next Wednesday for our regularly scheduled edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Have a great rest of the day, great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.